we move on to the second presentation in this session. The second presentation is by Jun Nah, and now I have to read his affiliation because although I know him for a while, I still have difficulties in pronouncing that. He is from Kyungpook National University in Daegu in Korea. Jun is a professor of economics at this university. He is one of the leading post-Keynesian researchers on autonomous demand-led growth models. He's published a series of papers together with Mark Leroy on that. And that is the focus of this presentation today. He has also been highly involved in the research and also in the implementation, if I may say so, of income-led growth strategies in Korea. He's an advisor, or he's part of an advisory board to the government. And he is the co-author of a book on the income-led growth strategy in Korea. And so, last but not least, and let me finish with that, Jun was a visitor at the IPE and the Berlin School of Economics and Law in 2018 and 2019. And I remember that is when he already presented some preliminary findings of the work, which he will now present in this workshop. So, Jun, with this introduction, the virtual floor is yours. 25 minutes, please no more. And you might want to share your screen to give your presentation.
All right, thank you, Eckhart. As he explained already, I used to work with Professor Mark Leroy on the super multiplier, Serafian super multiplier model. And right now I am working for the policy area in Korea. I am a member of the National Economic Advisory Council for the President, and also I am a member of the Presidential Committee for the Income-Led Growth. I was, in a sense, forced to work for government because there is only one reason, because there was not many post-Keynesian in Korea, so that's why. Today I'm going to talk about a recent policy experiment conducted in Korea for more than 2.5 years. The time period that I will cover is the one after the inauguration of the current government and before the coronavirus, which means from the summer of 2017 until the end of 2019. And as some of you already know, the Korean economy underwent some important changes in its modern era. There was a war between North and South in the early 1950s, and at that time, South Korea was one of the poorest country in the world. After the war, firstly, North Korea had been industrialized quite fast, and during the 1960s, it was North Korea that gained the name of Korean Miracles by Joan Robinson. In South Korea, the rapid industrialization has been started from the year of 1970. In 1970, GDP per capita of South Korea was $3,000. Nowadays, it is more than $30,000, which is similar to the level of Spain. It was a tenfold increase so far, and in the aggregate manufacturing production, Korea ranks 6th after China, US, Japan, Germany, and India. And it was one of the most rapid and also persistent economic growth. After the collapse of the Soviet, the competition between North Korea and South Korea ended. North Korea went through years of economic failures. Contrarily, during that time, South Korean economy steadily grew and became one of the developed countries now, even with its transition to neoliberalism. One of the biggest moments in Korean economic history was the years right after the Asian financial crisis. After the crisis, the status of Korean economy has changed from a net debtor country to a net creditor country. It was mainly due to its remarkable export growth in the sector of semiconductor and motor vehicles. So basically, South Korea can be classified as the export-led mercantilist regime. However, there was a caveat. The price of economic prosperity on the backside was the imbalances between capital and labor, between big enterprises and small ones, between household income and firms' profits. And even among workers, there is a growing evidence of a dual labor market, or so to speak, the fiscal workplace, which represents a widespread use of precarious platform workers. The gaps keep widening, and it was the spring and summer of 2017 that the vision of the so-called income-led growth, which is obviously a modified version of wage-led growth to the Korean economic reality, was promoted as a new economic paradigm by the current government, then newly elected government after the impeachment. So for today's presentation, let me firstly overview some of the empirical result that shows the Korean economy is indeed in a wage-led demand regime. Last year, I have done some studies together with my colleagues evaluating the achievements and limitations of the income-led policy experiment in Korea, and you will meet some of the results today. And in advance, I want to say sorry for my poor English. Okay, basically, according to a very basic and schematic understanding of demand-led growth, we can say that causation runs from the determination of income distribution to effective demand, and then from effective demand to accumulation and growth. So the key variable is wage share. The question comes up, how will we measure wage share exactly? In case of Korea, the main problem comes from the non-negligible portion of the self-employed. They earn mixed income. That includes both profits and labor income. Then how to deal with it? We employed 4 different measures for wage share, as you can see. However, they share a common trend. So to find out if Korean economy is wage-led or profit-led, we employed econometric methods of Hein and Vogel paper, which is a standard single equation approach, and you already have seen the previous presentation. We found that with statistical significance, consumption increases in wage share, as you can see here in this table, while net exports decreases in wage share. You can see the minus sign here. But the effect on consumption was found to be much bigger than the effect on net export quantitatively, based on estimated elasticities. Note that our choice of sample periods reflect possible structural break due to the Asian financial crisis in 1997. For investment, we couldn't find any statistically significant effect of wage share on it. As you could see from the previous presentation for the South American countries, just like South Korean countries, in Korea, investment seems to be independent from the wage share, here the labor income share. And also investment seems to be dependent upon its lagged value here. And importantly, contemporaneous income change here, supporting the hypothesis of the accelerator principle. The results so far that you have seen are largely consistent with the past studies, including the well-known Onaran and Galani's ILO report. Korean economy is in a wage-led demand regime. You can see these numbers here, estimated ones. In this study, we did not analyze the distributional features of productivity regime of the Korean economy, but there are some past studies which reported that the Korean economy is also in a wage-led productivity regime. Okay, yes, we know some possible disagreements. We also admit that there may be reverse causation running from growth to distribution, especially the bargaining power of labor may get weakened during economic downturn in that unemployment increases. Then the reserve army pulls wage down, aggravating distribution. However, some of the more recent studies, which I think are very important here, Covell 2019 and Blacker, Yoon Kim and Covell 2020. So these recent studies reveal that this possible endogeneity bias indeed favors finding profit-led regimes. So in this case, we can still apply the methods taken by Hein and Fogel. Okay, let me move on to policy issues. Well, there are some reference policy designs. You can find out that they share quite a lot in common. And when we start designing the income-led policies in Korea, the starting point was the book by Lavoie and Stockhammer 2013, and Descartes was one of the co-authors there. And well, this proposal given by Onaran is quite well structured, even though it is just a sketch. It has labor market policies that affect mainly primary income distribution. Then it has redistributive policies that affect secondary income distribution, redistribution. Finally, it has some complementing macroeconomic policies, including public investment that expands aggregate demand base. Okay, so then there are other reference designs that we have considered. Now let's go to the policies in Korea. Well, yes, in Korea, due to the high proportion of the self-employed, as I already showed to you, which is more than 20% of total employment, wage-led growth policies have been revised into the income-led policies, because we have to support for the poor self-employed group also, as well as workers. So we had in mind a virtuous cycle, which starts from income distribution to growth and then to employment. So here in this scheme, you can see we start from an income distribution here. And This will enhance household consumption, and it will go to the economic growth. And then, as a result, the employment increases. So a more equal income distribution toward households increases consumption demand, which in turn raises growth rate and then increases employment. Again, the increased employment here increases household income. So it was believed that the income-led policies might produce a desirable good circles. It was widely acknowledged that in Korea, the ratio of capital stock to the output is among the highest globally, while the ratio of household income to the aggregate income is among the lowest globally, comparatively to other countries. This brought about a decoupling of labor productivity and real wage. In retrospect, our policy arrangement or policy design does not seem to have been quite well structured. The scheme of the policies could have been more systematic, and this recognition, we think, can be quite important, since probably we could have dealt with a lot of unexpected bad events that we encountered better if our policies were more well prepared, retrospectively speaking. One thing to note is a missing link in the virtuous circle I have previously mentioned. With wage-led demand and wage-led productivity, we may not have wage-led employment, in the sense that more attention needs to be paid upon employment if we want to close the virtuous circle. We should have allocated more resources to maintain high level of employment, because coincidentally, the Korean economy fell into a usual downturn in business cycle in the fall of 2017, which is right after the initiation of the income-led policies. It was coincident, but anyhow, the policies should have fought for maintaining employment more actively. So we made big mistakes at that time. The income-led policy should have been designed more consistently with deep structural economic issues as well as other economic policies. In Korea, economic growth have been driven by a few large enterprises called 재벌, and they effectively rule the industries. They behave strategically as monopsonists, monopoly buyers, to small and medium-sized firms. Hierarchy in industries made a lot of problems. To 재벌 firms usually exploit the subcontractors, and unfair practice are still common. Cost pressures are severe to subcontracting small and medium-sized suppliers, which should compete also with Chinese suppliers. This environment is a hotbed of low wage and long hours work in Korea. The income-led policies should have been dealt with this issue more properly. Another problem was inherent inconsistency between two policy directions of the government. The government promoted the income-led growth prospect on one hand, and at the same time, the so-called innovation growth on the other hand, pursuing the fourth industrial revolution with digitalization and robotization. In fact, Korea is #1 in the industrial robot density globally, which is defined as the value of robot stock per worker. What if some innovation impedes rather than complements income-led growth? What if the precarious platform employments increase in the name of innovations? So that was the really important problem that we could not deal with properly. And okay. The minimum wage raise. The minimum wage raise was recognized among Koreans as the representative income-led growth policy. And there were harsh debates about its employment effects, even though they were framed off the point, because the purpose of the minimum wage institution is not to increase employment. So I have introduced the controversies in Korea in the slides quite thoroughly here. And I think you can refer to the details if you want. Okay, because I think I am quite slow, so let me go faster. Okay. Well, there are a lot of econometric analysis at the time, and we have studied every piece of the past results, and I have reported here. Okay, let's go to the slide 48. Okay, right here, the effect on the minimum wage raise on the hourly wage, you can see the hourly wage, and the overall effect was to improve the distribution. I mean the narrower down the wage inequality among workers, but in different from the different viewpoints, which looks at the monthly wage income, then we saw totally different pictures. So basically, it is quite difficult to judge at first glance, and we need a more thorough analysis. And so I think you want to see the interim results of the Korean income-led policies. Okay. Okay, distribution. Well, before distribution, growth records. Well, growth records are not clear, but in fact, there were apparent improvement in income distribution. This is adjusted wage share. The adjusted, I mean that we adjusted the operating surplus for the self-employed has been divided into properly to a wage part and profits part. Okay. And unit labor costs in manufacturing has grown positively, and the real wage growth was faster than the labor productivity growth in the years of 2018 and 2019 after the introduction of the income-led growth policies. So probably, even though we don't really have an official record for the adjusted wage share right now, but we can estimate that in 2019 we have quite good the record of the adjusted wage share. So I think we can say that there were apparent improvement in income distribution as a result of income-led policies, but still we should bear in mind that the long cycle strategy like income-led policies should not be judged solely based on short-run growth records. Instead, we should go longer in this. Okay. Well, these graphs shows the overall distribution has been improved as a result of redistribution. Well, I want to emphasize these new findings showing that in the short cycles lasting less than 8 years, a wage share increase may exert negative effects. However, in the cycles longer than 16 years, positive effects dominate. And the authors have analyzed the data from US, UK, and France for more than 100 years, and they found the characteristics of wage-led growth quite evidently. And in that sense, I think we should not, our basis for the success or failure of the wage-led policies should not be based on just short-run growth records. Instead, we should go to the longer, and the income-led growth is, in a sense, in that sense, a kind of a political process, and we should focus on strengthening political power and establishing political hegemony to push forward the strategy of wage-led growth. Okay, and so, well, I will skip the welfare policies and some thoughts. Okay, we have different conditions here other than other countries. We have a low tax to GDP ratio, and also we have a low public welfare spending to GDP ratio. Also, we have a low government debt to GDP ratio. It means we have a room for improvement in our social safety net and welfare policies. But we have a very weak union movement tradition, and also we have very weak representation of political left. It reflects our history of the Korean War and division of North and South. So in our case, a more urgent emphasis can be put on expanding welfare state than other countries. But our government at the time, when we start the income-led policies, the government chose to improve primary distribution firstly, because there was no fiscal burden for government. But it entailed high level of social conflict, especially the direct conflicts between the economical weak, such as workers and small business runners. So we think that labor politics is really important in addressing these conflicts. So the capacity and competence of labor politics is really an essential element that push forward the income-led growth strategy. So government was not really trying to improve secondary distribution at first because there were high fiscal burden with either increase in tax or debt. So some tentative lessons. Okay, as I said before, to establish a virtuous cycle structure, the national employment policy should have been pursued toward maintaining high level of employment. So for example, we can try to introduce some kind of a job guarantee program or something like that. And so active fiscal policies should have been pursued instead of the de facto fiscal policies in 2018. This graph shows that in year of 2018, the Korean government, in fact, ran a surplus, fiscal surplus. So it was not, it doesn't make sense, in fact. And also, we have to really be careful about the dual labor market and featured workplace story. So wage-led policies, we think, need to include the principle of equal value work, equal pay to narrow down the wage gap and wage inequality among workers, and more protective measures for precarious platform workers are needed by broadening the responsibilities of employers and redefining the employers, in fact. And also some more lessons. The short-sighted framework for policy evaluations should be overcome when we are dealing with long cycle projects such as the income-led growth. And the industrial relations need to be reformed fundamentally from toward an inclusive one, which is characterized by high coverage of collective agreements and centralized and coordinated bargaining system beyond firm level. And also, finally, gender and ecological issues should be combined with the income-led project properly. That's what we have found from the 2.5 years experiences of income-led growth experiment in Korea. That's all. Thank you.